Good morning. Yeah, it's going to be a beautiful day. And I'm very excited about the talk that we're going to have. So, my name is Dr. Kimberly McQuarrie, and I am the Director of Education and the co-director of the Innovation Labs. And one of the favorite things that I get to do is to invite amazing people to come here and share their insights so that they can deepen our understanding and engagement with the exhibitions that we have on view. And I'm very happy to be joined by a special guest just for this purpose, Professor of English from the University of South Florida, Dr. John Lennon. And he's going to speak in honor of the final month of the Murals exhibit. And he's going to explore the social, political, and cultural context of murals in his talk, Street Art Blues, Murals, Melancholy, and Resistance. But before we get to the talk, I always have a few housekeeping items. And of course, some of those are a lot of fun, like thanking the people who make programs like this possible, including the City of St. Pete for their continued sponsorship. And of course, our members. We couldn't do anything without our members. And as most of you know, in addition to the incredible artists, the dedicated curators and staff, exhibitions also depend on sponsors who put the financial support behind the exhibitions that they believe in. So I'd like to thank the City of St. Pete, Hal Friedman and Willie Radowski, Joanne Obanoff, the Keepers of the Collection, the Dalí Board of Trustees, the Guild at the Dalí, and of course, our Dalí Museum members. Thank you for sponsoring this amazing exhibition. And if you haven't seen it, time's running out. You have less than a month now, so run, don't walk upstairs if you have not yet been able to see that. And don't tell the security guards that I said that. No running up the stairs, please. So, of course, in addition to Coffee with the Curator, we have a host of events going on, and we have quite a lot going on in October, and I just wanted to share a few of those with you. We're going to have our Little Surrealist tour on Sunday the 5th, in case you have any little ones who are interested in doing a Dalí-themed tour. Tuesday the 7th, you'll notice the performance of I Am a Mystery, which focuses on the life of Salvador Dalí satellite figure, Amanda Lear. We're sold out. However, there will also be 2 performances at Studio at 620, because this is a collaboration between the Dalí and the Studio at 620. And those will include a performance and a discussion. It's going to be a really interesting event. On Thursday the 9th, we'll have Mosey over here in the Raymond James. So again, if you have any young ones, or if you're just young at heart and want to come and experiment with some science-themed art activities, come and join Mosey and us. And we'll also have Poetry at the Dalí here in the theater. On Saturday the 11th, Greg Mike will be in town. If you've been up to our exhibition, you'll know that Greg Mike's mural is in the U-shaped gallery. It's the one that covers the walls and the floor. And is quite colorful, and he will be here for a meet and greet, and they will be selling some signed fine art prints in association with the mural. And then on the 14th and the 21st, we're going to have Momentum Choreographers Showcase, Moving Surreal. And this is going to be a really interesting performance that's going to take place in the gallery. So you'll be in the exhibit upstairs, and the choreographers have created dance performances that are inspired by the murals. So those are going to be really cool events. Sunday the 19th, Yoga at the Dalí. And then, of course, on Saturday the 25th, our signature fundraising event, Sueños de Dalí. And the theme this year, in case that is inspiring to any of you to join, is Mount Olympus. So, yeah. Ponder that for a second. Ponder just how many Medusas are going to show up. Yeah, on Saturday the 25th. My money is on quite a few. So another thing that you might have noticed, and this is the last programming element that we're going to discuss today, Van Gogh Alive is returning to the Dalí, and it has been remastered for a dome. And if you're familiar with Van Gogh Alive, it is the kind of progenitor of all of the other experiences that exist, and one would say in the old parlance, often imitated, never replicated. And it looks really great in the dome, and I think it'll be an enjoyable experience. And then, of course, you can join us back here in November for a talk by our curator, Peter Tush, on exploring Dalí's Wines of Gala collages, which are going to be on display in our permanent collection soon. So, very cool stuff coming up. But cool stuff happening right now, today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Lennon. Lennon is a professor of English at the University of South Florida with diverse research interests that span working class literature, street art, and graffiti, all united by a central focus on how marginalized individuals express politicized voices through collective action. His book, Boxcar Politics, The Hobo in Literature and Culture, 1869 to 1956, reclaims the hobo as a politically charged figure within a resistive working class collective, while his co-edited open access volumes, Working Class Literatures, offers global perspectives on working class narratives. And I don't know if it's just because I grew up working class, but I think that sounds incredibly fascinating, personally. His work has appeared in journals such as the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies Review, New Proposals, American Studies, Irish Studies Review, Rhizomes, and Acoma. His latest book, Conflict Graffiti, From Revolution to Gentrification, investigates the evolving roles of graffiti in conflict zones, from revolutionary protest to commodified street art, and was supported by several grants, including an NEH summer grant, which is very prestigious. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Lennon.
All right, thank you so much for being here. Two things before I begin. The first is I just want to state that I'm speaking as an individual and not as a member of USF. Academic freedom is really under attack here in the state and within the university system, and it's very, very disappointing, and it's a tough moment right now in academia. I think students are not always going to get the conversations that they should be getting, and faculty are not going to be teaching the things that they should be teaching in these classes. So I hope, if you're not part of academia, that you're listening to these issues that are happening in our university. But just to be on the safe side, I just want to say that I am not speaking for the University of South Florida. Second thing, I am so excited to be here. I've been working on street art and graffiti for a while now, culminating in a book called Conflict Graffiti, from Street Art, from Revolution to Gentrification. Basically in that, what I looked at was how graffiti is used as a tool of resistance and or revolution. I went to a lot of different places, including Cairo and Beirut and Ramallah. I also looked closer at home in Detroit post-bankruptcy, New Orleans post-Katrina. And basically, again, I'm just looking at case studies of how people use graffiti to get their voices out. But in that book, I also look at street art. And one of the arguments I make in that book is that street art is also used by the state in usually public-private relationships in which they use street art to curb some of those voices, to erase some of those voices, to mute some of those voices. And while I absolutely stand by that, the last couple of years, what I've been trying to do is think more complexly about street art. And I've been working a lot in Belfast, for example, and working with street art festivals. And what I wanted to do was think about street art in a different way. And so what I've done is actually use psychoanalytical theory. Now, while I love theory, Marxist theory, queer theory, feminist theory, all different types of theories, I've always embraced them. The one theory I have never really done is psychoanalytical theory. And that's because there's a lot of things in my brain that I don't want to come out, and I kind of stuff them down, and I don't need any theory to kind of bring them out. But over the past year, I've worked with a couple of friends and faculty members and some great graduate students, and we just looked over this one theory on melancholia. And that kind of hit something, and I sort of am using that to really think through street art now. And so for this talk, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, thank you, Kim and Joy and Jack and John, who are back there for inviting me and being part of this. But for this talk, I'm going to use psychoanalytical theory. I'm actually going to, and this is really, really weird for me, I'm going to use this as almost a therapy session where I'm going to open it up and lay down on the couch and explain why when I walk along around St. Pete, why I become so melancholic when I look at the street art. And I know that's going to annoy some people or maybe disturb some people in this room, so walk with me as I go through this therapy session. Okay. Like many cities, St. Pete is awash in contradictions. For some, it's a sun-drenched coastal city known for its art scene, white sand beaches, and vibrant nightlife. It's home to the acclaimed Dalí Museum, Michelin-starred restaurants, and multi-million-dollar homes. For others, I'm sorry, let me start. This is kind of, Julie Kristeva mentioned this, and this is where this talk is kind of coming from. I'm writing from my own melancholia to kind of think about street art. So, for others, street art, it's closer to its depiction in Spring Breakers, with its neon-lit bars, pastel motels, and stark racial and class disparities. The city is also changing, especially the downtown area, which over the past 10 years has gone through an accelerated gentrification. Cranes continuously dot the skyline, showing the dramatic increases in high-rise apartment complexes and mixed-use developments, soaring home prices and rents, and changing demographic growth skewing towards young, affluent, and white. These changes are certainly apparent in the downtown area bounded by Fifth Avenue, Beach Drive, Central Avenue, and 9th Street. While the gentrification of St. Pete has been slowly happening over decades, it has accelerated in more recent years, coinciding with the Shine Mural Festival that has commissioned over 170 murals in the area since 2015, and they're going to have their new one just starting. This festival has been tremendously successful and is often recognized as a template for street art festivals worldwide. It is known throughout the street art community, festival community. Businesses are willing to pay up to $5,000 to have their establishments art adorned. Artists are paid, which is something that does not happen in many street art festivals. And there are numerous year-round mural street art tours celebrating St. Pete's muralification. To walk around downtown St. Pete is to be part of an open-air museum with its abundance of art-wrapped buildings featuring a wide array of subject matter. Some are fun cartoonish murals of alligators sunbathing, and others are portraits of women. Sorry. The defining feature, though, is your tremendous aesthetic quality. I walk along the art-filled streets, and I'm surrounded by beauty. And yet, when doing so, I find myself consistently overcome by melancholy. No matter how many times I walk the streets, I feel lost. And it's more than just a disorientation brought on by the merciless Florida sun. It's a sense of lostness in a city that resembles an advertisement for itself more than an actual place. The massive artworks add to a hyperreality that unmoors me. Feeling lost is often articulated in terms of a disruption in orientation, both spatial and affective. Sarah Ahmed describes this feeling as a condition in which the lines that organize one's sense of direction in the world becomes untraceable. The state of feeling lost is thus characterized by a misalignment between subject and world, a suspension of knowing where you are and who you are. This almost existential disorientation that I feel when following the street art in St. Pete is surprising. I have no psychic investment in the streets or establishments. There are no fond memories nor nostalgic remembering of his past glory days. How can I be melancholic in a place so devoid of personal meaning? In his often quoted 1917 article, Mourning and Melancholia, Sigmund Freud focuses on the way that people respond to, quote, the loss of a loved person, or the loss of some abstraction which takes place of one, such as one's country, liberty, an ideal, and so on. Both the melancholic and the mourner feel a devastating loss. The mourner, though, through a process of reality testing, realizing that the lost love is gone, understands what is lost, and through a grieving process, labors through their grief step by step. The melancholic, though, is different. They do not withdraw energy from the lost object and displace it onto something new. Rather, there is a narcissistic attachment. The paradox of melancholia is that the attachment to the lost object outweighs any desire to heal from the absence and fully engage in the present moment. In other words, while the mourner eventually moves past the loss, the melancholic is, according to Freud, a pathological mourner. The loss is an ambivalent loss, where the love-hatred for the lost object becomes internalized. Freud now would later reconceptualize his idea of mourning and melancholia, arguing that the work of mourning is not so straightforward, and that all processes of mourning contain some form of melancholia. In other words, there is no non-melancholic loss, no mourning that leaves the ego unchanged. In fact, Freud goes on even further to argue that the very character of the ego, who we are, is formed by its lost objects. Unlike the transient feeling of lostness, melancholia is enduring and inscribed within the psyche. The melancholic subject does not merely misrecognize their position in the world, but is formed by a refusal to let go, resulting in a persistent psychic ambivalence. One way to overstate this idea: who we are is informed by what we lost. In this way, the ego, which according to Freud forms the conscious identity and shapes who we experience ourselves to be, is formed through our losses. Now, of course, not all losses are the same or equal, and certain losses are harder to work through than others, as we repress some while refusing to let go of others. When I walk along St. Pete and look at the artwork, I realize what I have lost is an ideal concept of a city space. A city is a living, breathing environment whose edges are sharp and essence is always in the process of becoming. It is not a static thing. Rather, it is a participatory dialogue between the environment and the person, where meanings of both the individual and the city are created in that exchange. My melancholy comes not from losing myself in St. Pete, but rather losing the ideal of a city within its beautiful, highly skilled aesthetic pieces that are present on its streets. It's a loss that I've experienced before. This past summer, I found myself melancholic in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, a neighborhood where I previously lived and loved. Greenpoint has changed dramatically in all the years I've been gone. As I walked its once familiar streets, I often found myself disoriented, uncertain of my place in it. This lostness, though, was born of nostalgia. When I couldn't find my favorite pizza place, I became spatially lost because my memory markers were gone. My connection to Greenpoint is affect-based, freezing my neighborhood in a particular era and feeling sad that, like me, it has moved on. This nostalgic practice is inherently conservative, where I want to escape into the past, to emotionally displace my present feelings of lostness onto another time when I felt sure of myself. This conservative impulse then informs my values of the present. I'm annoyed that the wine bars have proliferated, but I feel a joy that the Turkey's Nest, a favorite dive bar, is still serving beer in large styrofoam cups. And one of the things I love about being able to talk is to show the Turkey's Nest to you all. So I just wanted to do that. Clearly, my feeling lost in Greenpoint hits differently than my disorientation in St. Pete. Street art, though, is a psychic connection. When I lived in Greenpoint, I spent restless nights following tags across buildings and air vents, using graffiti to understand where I lived. Returning in the summer of 2025, I found those walls mostly transformed. The graffiti mostly pushed aside, replaced by curated street art advertisements from companies like Colossal Media. Where I once heard the neighborhood yelling back at me, I now heard only the polite chatter of Murals hawking toothpaste. Freud discusses the work of mourning, the psychic process by which the mourner gradually withdraws emotional energy from the lost object, detaching it through conscious confrontation with reality. You acknowledge that the love object is gone. When I moved out of Greenpoint, I needed to put in that work as I left my beloved Northeast for the South. I slowly detached my connections, grieving the friends, family, and pizza I left behind. As the years have passed, though, I had mostly reoriented my reality. Curiously, though, I have made street art a fetish. It has materialized as the reason I left Brooklyn. Street art is a stand-in for the gentrification that has reared its head, dispersing a New Yorker like me away from my home. Importantly, it has also tinted my encounters with other cities, both within the US and abroad, with ambivalence. I love aimlessly walking the streets, and yet when spotting now ever-present street art adorning cities, I am overcome with that same feeling of melancholy. This lingering, effective imprint shapes how I experience new urban spaces, where every mural becomes both a reminder of what I've lost and a symbol of what cannot be fully mourned. What I've lost, again, is a particular form of dialogue with cityscapes. When traveling, I often interact with cities through its graffiti, where the tags force their way into my vision. For me, graffiti demands attention, whether it's through the small tag on the top of a mailbox or a big throw-up on the side of a building. As I walk and look, I am eavesdropping on a conversation that exists adjacent to me. As I walk my way down avenues and side streets, I'm consistently listening in, using my eyes to follow the conversation. I experience the city. I am bodily and psychically engaged. Now, admittedly, this is a highly romantic reading of my interactions, but it's a personal, visceral experience. Using Freud to self-analyze, when I think of graffiti and my interactions with it, I've created an ideal participatory city space. In its present form, I find street art often captures the above chaotic conversations, organizes them, and clearly articulates a cohesive and universal narrative of a city space. Street art requires little effort for me to enjoy. I don't need to search it out. The conversation, like a lecture, is waiting for me. Which brings me back to St. Pete's downtown, which has become representative of my ambivalent relationship to street art and my inability to mourn the lost ideal of a city. I'm lost in downtown St. Pete because surrounded by such beauty, I am disconnected from it. I don't experience the downtown, I look at it. Whether I'm in the confines of the Dalí Museum or in my car passing the 7th Street. For example, Canadian artist Emmanuel Jarris's magnificent and large photorealist image of a woman standing in front of a body of water created for the Shine Festival is visually arresting in its scale and precision, but its polished completeness leaves me in a place of admiration rather than deeper engagement. This replica of a woman could be on any wall in any city, and it interacts with its surroundings as it interacts with me, is there to be looked at. It is a piece of public art, a monument to a city that feels sealed off, protected, and safe. The narrative is fixed. The image is photorealistic, a simulacrum of a woman in front of a body of water painted on a wall of a city that also begins to feel like a representation of itself. When I look at this piece, there's a feeling of ambivalence as I both enjoy what I'm looking at while hating the simulation of a curated city. Understanding ambivalence is central to the work of mourning. When we lose something, it isn't love, but the mixture of love and hate that matters. We'll have difficulties in mourning, not because we love something too much, as common sense would suggest, but because our hatred is too powerful. When I look at all these beautiful murals lining the streets of St. Pete, I am conflicted. I admire the artist's expertise and the transformation they brought to downtown, and yet I also feel a basic, visceral resistance, or even a kind of hatred towards these same murals. As I stand before them, I feel caught in the push and pull of appreciation and resentment. For Melanie Klein, another theorist who works in melancholia, losing someone or something unconsciously revives all the earlier losses one has experienced. As I walk through downtown St. Pete, the losses of the other cities epitomized in his street art creates an overwhelming ambivalence. Okay, in the rest of this talk, I will get off the proverbial couch and try to walk us through how using mourning and melancholia can actually be a way of reconceptualizing street art's relationships to cities during this present moment by focusing on two things: street art's ambivalent relationship to a graffiti ethic, and also something called the street art machine. Street art's muralification, as Patricia Phillip calls it, is part of the quote-unquote public art machine, a system that decides who paints, what they paint, and how we're supposed to see it. Walking downtown, I know every big wall will offer me a beautiful mural, but that predictability turns the city into a gallery of surfaces to look at, not experience to engage with, like AI images that grab my attention but don't ask much from me. Peter Bengtson once argued that street art could disrupt the public art machine by creating unexpected encounters. But in St. Pete today, street art feels fully absorbed in the very system it was meant to challenge. Perhaps, though, I am being way too hard on contemporary iterations of street art. Maybe I've lost the meaning of what it is, or more importantly, what is street art's function in relationship to a cityscape? Raphael Schachter, and one of his books is actually out there. Raphael Schachter argues that street art as a term is no longer the proper categorization of the sanctioned art we see on our streets. For Schachter, to call something street art is a misleading frame of reference, and he argues that street art was only a 10-year period, roughly from 1998 to 2008, that contained around 100 to 200 artists worldwide. Importantly for Schachter, these street artists, quote, and this is kind of, for me, a very important quote, for Schachter to call something street art, importantly for Schachter, these street arts held on to a DIY, self-sufficient spirit of graffiti culture, the ideological basis of the period. They held onto the autonomy and independence that gave its artists opportunities that institutions would never have allowed. They retained graffiti's refusal to be professionalized or standardized. They retained the belief that spontaneity and fidelity would always trump permissibility and legality. Put differently, street art did not need to replicate graffiti's appearance or aesthetic form. Rather, it had to embody the graffiti ethic. By the mid-2010s, Bengtson and Schachter pointed to legality and professionalization as the forces turning street art into something else. Schachter, reflecting on Tate Modern's 2008 street art show, which he helped run, actually, described a new wave of what he calls street art on steroids, what he also calls neo-muralism, professional, government-funded, and so dominant it overwhelms the term street art itself. Still, both scholars insist there are cracks where the artist can disrupt city spaces in innovative, boundary-pushing ways. Bengtson champions a raw, even vandalistic openness that forces us to confront the work physically, while Schachter looks for artists who carry the graffiti ethic and graffiti spirit into galleries and public walls alike, treating graffiti less as a style and more as an ethic, a way of seeing and engaging with the world. In their respective articles, Bengtson and Schachter are interested in street art as an art form. Both, though, are gesturing towards its politics, which is helpful when exploring the melancholy that street art can produce. If street art no longer, for me, embodies an ethic of disruption tied to a specific moment and place, then losing my ideal conception of a city also means experiencing a political loss. What if I'm missing when looking at much contemporary street art is a certain type of practice or politics that challenges and disrupts a city? Public art's muralification, I feel, entombs the city in layers of paint that whitewashes its edges, rather than challenging passerbys to confront their own presence on a particular block, in a particular city, in a specific historic moment. In my conception of politics, I draw on this philosopher Rancière, who sees politics as rupture, a disruption of the social order that tells us who belongs in public space and who does not. Graffiti offers a perfect example. It's dismissed as vandalism, while sanctioned murals of beautiful women are celebrated as art. Politics, in this view, happens when those hierarchies are unsettled, when unexpected voices and bodies force their way into spaces that they are not meant to occupy. For Rancière, this kind of dissensus is not just intellectual, but it's sensory. It breaks the natural ties between people and places, making both art and politics forms of equality through disruption. We can see this type of transformation of street art into public art in St. Petersburg. Illegal graffiti once disrupted the city space with tags, crude drawings, and wild-style markings that injected names and desires directly into public space. But as property values rose and businesses and surveillance increased, those ruptures were muted. The Shine Mural Festival, linking artists with businesses, further helped absorb street art into a curated, city-friendly arts district. Today, murals are expected and celebrated, while unsanctioned graffiti has little space to thrive. The political edges of graffiti survives only in scattered pockets, overshadowed by layers of bureaucracy, curated walls, and tourist-friendly art. In this story, gentrification and street art advance together, turning disruption into decoration. But that gentrification narrative, I feel, and I have worked through this, can also feel too overused, sometimes flattening local realities. And there's a lot that I could talk about here, but I'll sum it up with one line. Adam Turkington, who organizes Belfast's Hit the North Festival, and he and I got into a pretty heated discussion when I asked him if his event was causing gentrification. He said, "I get the argument, but I can't then just not do my art. What are you supposed to do? Are you just supposed to say, yeah, the neighborhood looks like shit?" Gentrification, like neoliberalism, produces tangible material consequences. However, both concepts have become reductive labels that tend to obscure the specificities of particular places and historical contexts, rather than illuminating their nuanced complexities. Right now, I'm not interested in exploring the nuances of gentrification in St. Pete. Rather, I aim to investigate the relationship among gentrification, street art, and melancholy to more deeply explore the role street art can assume in our psychic life when encountering urban landscapes. Blaming my melancholy on gentrification may therefore be too simple. As Wendy Brown argues, this reflects, quote, a left melancholy, a mournful, backward-looking fixation on lost political ideals that immobilizes leftists, leading to fragmented micropolitics and a retreat from transformative collective action. Brown warns that this stance risks clinging to past promises, turning critique into preservation rather than fueling new mobilization and change. By labeling the loss of neighborhoods as gentrification, and then walking haughtily past the newly opened Starbucks with a pretty mural on its side, neither offers a solution nor labels the reality of the neighborhood in precise terms. It feels good to blame gentrification for the disorientation that Starbucks represents, but there may be an unavowed loss covered over by my upturned nose. Brown suggests that what we've lost is the promise that left analysis would give us a clear path toward the good, the right, and the true. But gentrification resists such clarity. As murals multiply, street art itself then becomes a fetish, a kind of straw man that I want to burn. Brown reminds us that clinging to past radical ideals risks preserving critique instead of rethinking politics for the present, glorifying a past that shields us from confronting the now. Seen in this way, my disdainful glance at the Starbucks mural in the corner is less an act of resistance than a symptom of a melancholic longing for a lost and perhaps only imagined city, one that comforts through critique but resists the difficult labor of reinvention. When we talk about gentrification, we're often talking about nostalgia, not only for the neighborhood, but for a version of ourselves tied to that place. The danger is when nostalgia just looks backward and freezes us. Walter Benjamin reminds us that the past isn't simply heritage or linear progress. It can be a site of rupture, a way to disrupt the present. Applied to street art, then, this story of progress often casts graffiti and murals as part of a smooth evolution towards professionalized festivals and branded art districts. But this narrative folds resistance into a marketable product, downgrading unsanctioned work as dirt and elevating curated murals as consumable culture. Yet street art cannot be fully contained, and if we can capture the graffiti ethic, we can also keep the rupture that street art and graffiti are able to produce. Its presence in public spaces keeps open the possibility of interruption, moments when past struggles reappear and spark new action. The point is not to romanticize an edgy past, but to ask, how do today's murals form constellations with histories of resistance? What ruptures can they open up in the present? We see this clearly in Minneapolis after George Floyd's murder, when street art transformed into a living argument, interrupting urban space, amplifying marginalized voices, and sketching visions of alternative futures. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered outside of Cup Foods at 38th and Chicago in Minneapolis when Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on him for over 9 minutes. Almost immediately, the intersection became a site of protest and a memorial. Community members established barricades, forming George Floyd Square, an autonomous zone filled with evolving art, murals, graffiti, sculptures, and offerings. The art emerged directly from systematic racial violence, embodied by what Catherine McKendrick calls Black aesthetic practices, freedom-making gestures tethered by violence, but imagining new ways of living. Peyton Scott Russell's 12 by 12 mural of Floyd is a striking example. Russell, who grew up nearby and runs a graffiti education program, painted the portrait from a selfie Floyd had once posted online. Using graffiti techniques, he added dripping black and white paint to convey movement and grief. Though created in the studio, Russell placed the work in the square, bridging the work of street art with communal memorials. As Raphael Schachter argues, this blending of studio practice with graffiti's ethical imperative preserves radical potential, redirecting rather than replicating street art's rebellious energy. The mural turned the square into a site of reckoning. To encounter Floyd's face, there was to confront a psychic wound, to engage in what Freud calls reality testing, the acknowledgement of loss that makes mourning possible. Other works also exemplified this process. One of the best-known murals painted on Cup Foods by Cadix Hera, Zena Goldman, and Greta McLean shows Floyd's calm face framed by a sunflower. Within the petals of the words "Say Our Names," surrounded by the names of other victims of political violence. Below, a community member later added the phrase, quote, "I can breathe now." Goldman noted the urgency of creating it quickly to seize a narrative and present Floyd not just as a victim, but as a human being, before media images could distort the story. Right-wing media often frames victims of police violence in racist terms, creating narratives of thugs, by showing police mugshots or images of allegedly immoral behavior. The mural created by these three muralists entered this contested space and interjected Floyd's image, which then became a backdrop for mourners and visitors' selfies and a defining image that many news outlets used in their own coverage. There was, though, pushback from other artists and activists who questioned the three muralists' access to this wall, two of whom are Latinx and one white. Goldman, who is white, responded to the backlash, thought about it and responded to it, and offered a blunt apology on her ex, saying, "We fucked up," taking responsibility for not centering Black voices in the project itself. In her apology, she discusses the typical process of creating murals, explaining that part of the reason murals take so long is because there are community meetings to discuss and debate location choice, concept, artist representation, and more. We didn't do any of this. The square is community curated, and Hera, Goldman, and McLean did not recognize how their work fit into the larger evolving curated space of the square. This tension raises numerous questions that deal with the intersections of race, trauma, and aesthetic expression. But it also sheds light on the complex ways that curation are part of the way that communities mourn. The in-process of forming democratic space of George Floyd Square allowed artists and community members to use the walls and streets for their own mourning process, enabling them to express their grief and anger. But while individuals grieved, the community grieved alongside. The two are linked. The community became curators, raising objections and offering suggestions to what should appear on the walls. These artists, whose stated intentions were to help shape the larger narrative of Floyd's image in the media, were not part of that specific community of the square, nor were they part of the Black community. They interrupted the space, and because of this, were rebuked by activists and other artists who were then more entrenched within the space. Significantly, though, is the way that the curator community and the disruptor artists dealt with this tension that illustrates how the process of community mourning can resist the worst aspects of present-day street art culture that offers a rebuke of the public art machine. The curator community did not demand that the mural be erased, nor did it deny the right of these artists access to the walls. The disruptor artists, on the other hand, did not fall back on cliche universalizing arguments about the right to create art, but offered a clear, thoughtful response, acknowledging the racial and class dimensions of the particular space and the role that the mural plays within the material and psychological aspects of mourning. Importantly, state representatives and bureaucratic policy were completely absent from this conversation. This is a space that allows for interjections and conversations that extend from the material space where these activists express their art and protest, to iconic imagery used in many news stories, to apologies offered by these artists in public online spaces, to further articulations of this debate about what the square is and what it should become. It became part of a conversation rooted in this living city space, but extending far and wide. The square and the artwork is built outside of the public art machine, created in bursts of passion, consciously curated by non-professionals, and then becomes part of a larger, complex mourning process. The street art is not something here to be looked at, but is part of a larger mourning process that allows for hard conversations about what is the role of art and who it is for. These murals have a dialectic relationship to the city itself. They reveal the sharp edges of the city with its history of over-policing of Black communities and contains numerous voices that do not speak in unison. When I visited George Floyd Square in the spring of 2025, it did not take me long to be approached by a man who good-naturedly but firmly asked me what I was doing there. As I was part of a group who had been there before and spoken with this man before, he talked guardedly about the various disagreements within the activist circles concerning the future of the square. He was adamant that he wanted to see this neighborhood and businesses around them thrive and did not want it to just be a place for people to come to take a quick selfie before heading off to go on with their day. As if on cue, a man jumped out of an Uber and as it was idling in the middle of the road, emerged to take a picture of Russell's mural. This man interrupted and intervened, kindly, but again very firmly, telling the Uber driver that he had to park the car in the Speedway parking lot and not hold up traffic, while simultaneously talking to the man who was on a business trip from London. The photo of the mural that the man wanted to take quickly on the way to the airport became an impromptu lesson administered by this man about George Floyd, political violence in a neighborhood in need of healing. This man curated the experience, influencing the length and time the man stayed in the square, how he took his pictures, and the context of the square as well. The murals in George Floyd Square embodied the graffiti ethic, where the artwork speaks directly to the community, and the community answers back. It is a way for community members to mourn through this interaction, move away from melancholy, and move towards healing. Obviously, this is a distinct square and cannot be replicated here in St. Pete. But what I want to leave you with today is if we do not drift into left melancholy and embrace the graffiti ethic in our murals that dot our city, we can interact with a living city that has potential to move us into new possibilities. Thank you.
We have some microphones for questions coming in, so if you want to raise your hand, grab a microphone because the people on YouTube can't hear your questions. Joy will go on that side, I'll go on this side. Questions?
Hi. I just wanted to, not really a question, but thank you for your work.
Oh,
It's deep and lots to think about. I've been in St. Petersburg since 1990-ish. And I've seen a lot of changes. My grandfather worked at the Vinoy back in the day, and I was here when it was abandoned, and I worked there myself. Moved away to Virginia, and just moved back, and the city is like completely different. Mm-hmm. And I went to Pride by myself, and the smells had changed and the walls had changed, and I felt what you were sharing. So thank you.
thank you.
I wanted to thank you for doing this part of the presentation because I lost my brother, and at the skate park that he used to go to, the guys did a graffiti of his name and skate in peace. And I didn't know why it touched me so much. And seeing this is exactly why, is because it's art, but it's touching so many people, and everyone knew him at the skate park. He was an architect, but he helped others, whether they were 5 years old, 30 years old, he's always been a skater. And seeing this really brought closure as to why that was so important. And I had been thinking about ways to honor him, and this sort of solidified an idea of wanting to do more street art at that particular skate park. So thank you.
Thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry for your loss. I do just want to add to that is that within the graffiti culture, this idea of memorials are really, really important. I just went to a meeting, and it's interesting as an academic, and when I start thinking about this stuff, it's so, and especially when I'm using theory, it's so easy for it to get disconnected from the actual material practice of writing graffiti. But I went to this, it was a bunch of like old school graffiti guys. And I was I was one of 3 academics in this whole place, and it was all just covered with really like famous and graffiti people. And listening to them talk, there was this like, oh, this means so much to them. And it's easy to forget that as an academic, but when you hear the stories, and there was a person who died, and what other people, other graffiti writers would do then is they carry his name, his tag, and they take it over. And they put their tags, his name, on different places for years and years and years. So his memory does not go away. And listening to those conversations, you realize that this formed a community, not only with the city itself, because that's what they did. They take over and bomb a neighborhood, and they're part of a neighborhood, and everyone within that neighborhood knows each other. And it forms this community that most people do not see, but means so much, and names kind of really are the epitome of that. And so that kind of is really fascinating to me, that memorial, that continuing of the name is still happening. So thank you for your comment.
A question over here.
So I guess in Florida, probably the biggest issue about street art is art on the street that's been removed. Mm-hmm. And there's been different reactions to that, I guess chalk, projection, there might be others. I was just curious your thoughts on the responses to that and maybe how effective they are.
Sure, that's a great point. So part of my argument I think I'm making is street art is becoming too curated and too artist-friendly, tourist-friendly, and it becomes part of this public art machine that is really just a business-centered movement. And I absolutely believe that. But what's interesting is how street art and graffiti, but street art in this case, really does have power. Because if it didn't have power, DeSantis and others would not be trying to remove it. If the idea of Black Lives Matter on a wall, on a street, so disturbs people in power that they have to erase it, that shows the power itself within that. And who are they going after with this street art? It's Black Lives Matter, and it's LGBTQ plus people. It shows their smallness. Shows their smallness. It's also, and here is where we can get it shows that they're scared. As much as they seem like they have power, and as much as they are erasing things, they're doing so because their power is so unstable. And if they're so worried, which if you know kind of the history behind the Black Lives Matter mural that was put in front in St. Pete, it was originally put in front of a police station, right? And that it was not allowed there, and a pro-police mural was put in its place there. It was removed to St. Pete. So even that shows that it was getting kind of some traction. They were worried about that. And now, since there's a little bit of power now that they're erasing the graffiti and they're erasing the street art. I think it shows how scared they are. I think it shows how small they are in this way. And I do think there's ways to do it. Now, can graffiti, and this is where I'm going to say I'm not advocating this, I just want to put that out there, but can graffiti, can these messages, can these small interruptions, disruptions cause even more worry to them? Absolutely, and that's where my first book comes in. That when there is this authoritarian wave over a space, graffiti, the small voices, the small moves, that is what shows that people are still pissed off, people are still questioning, people are still moving forward. So there is that interaction that's happening. So back to your point is are people doing that today? Absolutely, and you can look throughout, all these images in graffiti websites and on different websites that you can see these moments of this erasing of sanctioned street art, and now the move for unsanctioned, illegal graffiti and street art is happening. I don't know if that answers, hopefully it did.
Doesn't the fact that the Rainbow mural and the Black History Matters murals were there, I don't know about the legal and zoning and all that, but the fact that Mayor Welch and other business leaders have sprung into action to counteract that. doesn't that kind of undermine your thesis that street art is all tourist-friendly, capitalist-friendly, consumer-friendly? It seems to me, yeah, that's true. But when a city has moved toward inclusivity and welcoming and kindness and, all the human rights, that's part of the power structure. And the reaction, we'll see where it goes. I mean, there's a lot of noise and then the cameras go elsewhere. Doesn't that kind of undermine the idea that the street art is always part of this seamless, gentrified consumer society?
Yeah, and I thank you for that point. I don't think all street art is like that. I do think it leads, though, to this feeling within street art of a safety that is not necessarily. Let me step back here. I think that street art, regardless of what it says, when it is sanctioned, does offer a way for people to not be challenged. I think that it offers a way that and it's so fascinating. I'm almost using an argument pre-Trump. I'm almost using an argument that people are not taking street art seriously anymore, and I think your point is that they are. But this is a specific moment. I think what it was a way to celebrate difference in a very easy way without having anything behind it, not having necessarily a community behind it. I think now, though, street art is actually going to have some of those edges back to it, where it's not just about corporate-friendly comments, but actually more hard-edged ones. So let me give you a specific example of this. So, and this is kind of going back to my other book, but one of the arguments I make is I went to Louisiana, and I went to Baton Rouge. And Baton Rouge was going through a cleanup area. And what they wanted, in using kind of the mayor and other people, they used a very bureaucratic way of bringing street art into the city. And it was good stuff that they were doing. They were cleaning up neighborhoods. They were putting up and erasing the graffiti and putting up good street art that tourists would like to see. At the same time, there was an orthodontist. He was just an orthodontist who had some money. And what he did was he went into the poorer black area that is being gentrified. And he got some artists to paint all throughout this area. And one of the things that he put on a house was an image of a specific moment in time in which a black man was killed by white officers when he was shooting against them. So a violent image that is happening there. And what he said was, this is not the street art that you're going to see that the neighborhood, that the mayor or anybody wants. But this is what the city needs. It needs to have these types of conversations. There is no way that a proper government would ever allow an image of a cop killing an individual on a wall. But he wanted to have that difficult conversation of why that moment happened. So the point to yours is absolutely what the mayor is doing, what arguments are being made. And actually, the street art too is beautiful. I hope that came across. Like, I like this street art. But what I think it's also doing is having those conversations become easy rather than having these more difficult conversations.
We'll take two more questions, one on this side, one on this side.
Wow, that was a lot.
I've been told that from people.
So I wonder whether the imprimatur that comes with the curated street art movement, does that have a counterbalance in what you might call the pure graffiti artist community, with an increased proliferation of graffiti or art that does not have an imprimatur. And then the second thing is, when street art is consumed, I'm not an artist, but I look at arty things and I wonder what's the motivation there. When street art is consumed, the art that's curated and has the imprimatur, it gives us a way to feed back to someone. But a radical graffiti mark, it's anonymous. And if it inspires some emotion in me or some reaction, I don't have anyone to talk to about it. I don't have a way to say I'm melancholic. What can I do now? So what do you think about those two ideas?
Well, you can always talk to me if you want. Those are very good points. So just to your first point, I think one of the things is, and I guess this is one way to talk about this, is that when I look at graffiti, I realize the conversation often isn't for me. I realize it's a conversation that's happening, and it's a conversation I will never really understand the whole thing, but I will understand parts of it, and I will start following it along. And so it forces me to actually start listening more. And you know, this might sound weird, but like what you do when I'm looking at graffiti is I'll walk down alleyways, I'll walk down streets, I'll actually touch the walls, see if the paint is still there, if it's dry or not. I'll look on the floor and see the drops on there. And what I'm doing is actually experiencing the city, the physical city itself, the smells of the city. I'm overhearing not only these conversations of what this tag means, but I'm present within that moment of the city. That's what I sort of see, and that's what I've been trying to kind of move towards when I'm looking at really beautiful art with some of the art that I showed. It's beautiful. I love it. It's really, really nice. But it's just there on a wall that is so easy for me to accept and not challenges me and not makes me think. It's an art piece. It's public art. I'm not touching that wall. I'm not really thinking about it. I'm looking at the usually very large images instead of going and looking at the small spots. So that's one of the things that I'll say. So who is it for? Again, I think looking at some really beautiful images that the Shine Mural Festival does, it's really great. And it does create some conversations. I guess what I'm just trying to offer is when you go to every city, and every city now has these street art murals because businesses know that this brings in tourists. It then becomes a certain type of art. And and that leaves me lost because I feel like any city that I go to, I can sort of know what I'm going to see now instead of really being challenged by it. So that's the overarching argument that I'm making.
Take one more question.
Thanks for being here. Very provocative. So many, if not most of us living in St. Pete, everyday people are opposed to the gentrification. What could or should the Shine Festival do to be more provocative and less part of the gentrification movement?
That's a great question, and you know, this is the awfulness of being an academic, is I think about these things, but I don't necessarily have a good solution. So when I see, and this is why I've been spending, and I'm going to spend the next couple of years doing this, is what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to go to all different street art festivals around the world. And I'll give my experience of Belfast, for example. So in Belfast, I had this argument that I was going to go into, that these festivals are just about gentrification and that's it. And so then I spend weeks with the organizers, the artists, and the people who are volunteers in this. And you realize these are just really good people. They're really nice people who are trying to do something really good. They want to bring art. They want to bring people, they want to get artists paid. They want to give money to the people making the art. They have these ideas. And I think that's something that is really important for me to state. What I'm arguing, though, or what I think, though, is that with any connection to the bureaucracy of a state, there are some things you have to give up. There are certain conversations that you cannot have. There are certain things that you're not allowed to do. And I think once festivals get larger and larger, those more difficult conversations get smaller and smaller on the walls. I think newer ones have more of an opportunity for that, but maybe I'll be invited in a couple of years after I have this project done, and I'll tell you, hopefully, that I see something else. So that's what I'm working on.
Please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you.
I'm sure that you want to accost him before he leaves with any questions.
Hopefully no one has tomatoes.